The Fate of Amirdrassil is the fourth and final wing in Amirdrassil, the Dream Soap raid. It is home to Tindral Sage-Swift and Fyrakk. Very quickly, going to describe how this guide is set up. The video is split into chapters for each boss. You can find them down below. The first chapter will describe the boss fight mechanics and each of the important abilities. The second chapter will be role-specific duties. LFR and normal are practically identical, but I will make a note on differing areas. Tindral Sage-Swift. This is a high movement 3-phase fight with 2 dragon riding intermissions. Phase 1 will be Tindral in his humanoid form and occasionally switching into his moonkin form. The intermission starts when Tindral flies away. The raid will chase the boss while collecting green orbs. After catching up to Tindral, a short DPS race begins before Phase 2. Phase 2, Tindral will have all of his humanoid abilities, but it will introduce a new form into the rotation, his Treant form. The moonkin form is not active during Phase 2. Another intermission and DPS race occurs before ending with Phase 3. Phase 3 is chaotic and fast as he is rotating through his humanoid, moonkin, and Treant forms, utilizing all mechanics from the previous phases. Phase 1. Tindral starts the fight in his humanoid form and will occasionally shift into his moonkin form for this phase. There are 3 main mechanics here and all are done while he is in his humanoid form. Mass entanglement. Every player will be targeted with this and should group up as close as possible without standing in somebody else's circle. After 6 seconds, all players will be rooted in place. These roots must be burnt down. If your class has a snare freeing ability, you can also use this to break free. The second main mechanic is fiery growth. A few players will obtain this debuff and it lasts for 40 seconds. This is dispellable and should be dispelled once the player relocates away from the rest of the raid. Once this is dispelled, on normal difficulty, it will leave behind a large fire patch on the ground. However, if you're on LFR difficulty, there will be no fire patch. The last main mechanic is tank-based and is called Blazing Mushroom. He will spawn a mushroom every 3 seconds. These will explode after 3 seconds to deal massive raid damage. These mushrooms need to be soaked by the tanks, but they must be alternated as they apply a vulnerability debuff for 3 seconds. For instance, Tank 1 will soak Mushroom number 1, Tank 2 will then soak Mushroom number 2, Tank 1 will then soak Mushroom number 3. Tindral has another tank buster attack called Searing Wrath. This is a debuff that's applied with every melee attack. You want to taunt swap these right around 6 to 7 stacks. Tindral has one more humanoid ability called Falling Star. He pulls a star down from the sky. When this hits his location, it deals raid-wide damage and then generates swirlies all over the arena. These are avoidable. During Phase 1, Tindral will shift into his moonkin form and this will grant him 2 extra abilities. However, these are just abilities and don't really have any mechanics associated with them. Sunflame. This is an unavoidable attack that hits all players for damage. And Fire Beam. He will mark his current location with a large swirly. Just move out of the zone. Once he finishes the cast, an explosion will occur and fire beams will travel out and away from the blast zone in a line. Just sidestep these to avoid damage. Humanoid abilities. Mass Entanglement. Targets all players and after 6 seconds will root them. These roots are targetable and must be killed, or players can use any movement freeing ability. Fiery Growth. Targets random players, creates a giant ring around them, and deals damage every second for 40 seconds or until dispelled. Scorching Ground. This is on normal difficulty. Once Fiery Growth is dispelled, it leaves this large area on the floor. Blazing Mushroom. This is the tank buster. The boss will spawn mushrooms around him, 1 every 3 seconds. These mushrooms must be soaked. They deal damage and apply a debuff that increases damage by the next mushroom by 200% for 3 seconds. Searing Wrath. This is also tank related. This is the debuff applied with each melee attack. It deals fire damage every second and lasts for 20 seconds. Falling Star. Brings down a star at his location. Upon impact, deals raid-wide damage and then creates star fragments. Star Fragments. These are swirlies marked on the ground. They deal damage if you get hit. Moonkin abilities. Sunflame. Beams of Light. This hits all players for fire damage. Fire Beam. Tindral channels a blast marked by a circle. After it casts, sends multiple fire beams out from the blast location that travel in a straight direction. Phase 1. Role-specific duties. Tanks. Taunt swap around 6 to 7 stacks of Searing Wrath. Alternate soaking the mushrooms. One tank soaks mushroom 1 and 3. The second tank soaks 2 and 4. Healers. Expect constant raid-wide damage. Group near the tank to clear your roots. Dispel Fiery Growth. On normal, be aware it leaves behind a large ground area, so don't dispel until that player has relocated away from the raid. DPS. Group roots near the tanks. Burn down the roots ASAP. Run away from the raid when you have Fiery Growth, and watch your feet. The Intermission. After 2 casts of each ability, Tindral will shift into his owl form to fly away. He will start by using Typhoon, which will push all players backwards and drop a bunch of feathers on the ground. Players must grab these feathers in order to mount their dragon riding mount. To grab these feathers, you just have to walk and touch them. You don't actually have to interact with them. Touching one of these feathers allows you to mount your dragon riding mount. The raid must then pursue the boss. There will be a bunch of red flying orbs with green flying orbs between them. The raid should attempt to grab as many green orbs as possible before landing their mounts. These green orbs buff the entire raid and stack. Each red orb will do damage to that player. Once the raid catches Tindral, a DPS race ensues. He will begin channeling Supernova. If the shield is not broken, then the raid will wipe. This is made easier depending on how many orbs you collect. Once the shield is broken, Phase 2 will begin. Phase 2. This phase, Tindral will use his humanoid and treant form. All of his humanoid abilities remain the same here: Mass Entanglement, Falling Star, Fiery Growth, Blazing Mushrooms. The new treant form has 2 abilities. The main ability is Flaming Germination. This will do damage to all players over 15 seconds and throw seeds on the ground around him. These seeds must be crushed by players. To crush them, just run over top of them. If a seed is not crushed within 10 seconds, it will sprout into a tree that will deal big damage to the raid over the next 6 seconds. Each player will also take damage as they crush a seed, so pop a defensive when clearing multiple. His other ability is a healing absorb called Suppressive Ember. This needs to be cleared as it stacks. Treant Abilities: Flaming Germination. Tindral unleashes seeds around him and burns the platform, dealing raid-wide damage for the next 15 seconds. Seed of Flame. These are the seeds that are thrown. These need to be crushed by players and they inflict fire damage to any player crushing them. A Flaming Tree. This appears if a seed is not crushed within 10 seconds. It deals big fire damage to the entire raid and over the next 6 seconds. Suppressive Ember. This is a healing absorb placed on random players. This stacks if not healed through. Phase 2 role-specific duties. Tanks. Taunt swap around 6 to 7 stacks of Searing Wrath and alternate the soaking the mushrooms. Help clear out the seeds. Healers. Expect constant raid-wide damage. Group the roots near the tank. Dispel Fiery Growth. Clear Suppressive Embers, Healing Absorb. Expect increased raid damage when clearing seeds and even more if a tree appears. DPS, group the roots up and burn them. Run away from the raid when you have Fiery Growth and pop a defensive cooldown when you're crushing seeds. Intermission 2. After 2 more rotations through his abilities, another intermission will happen. This is the same as before. Collect the feather, fly through the green orbs, and burn down the shield before Supernova finishes casting. Phase 3. This is a complete combination of all 3 forms. Tindral will switch between his humanoid, moonkin, and treant form. The main difficulty with this phase is that all his abilities will begin overlapping. If most of your raid stays alive through the first 2 phases, this is the most ideal phase to bloodlust or heroism to help with the increased damage and mechanics. The 4 main things that the raid should focus on are grouping and breaking free of the Mass Entanglement roots, moving away from the raid with Fiery Growth, crushing all of the seeds, and tanks soaking the mushrooms. Aside from that, be aware of your positioning and watch your feet. Fyrakk. This is a 3-phase fight with an intermission period between Phase 1 and 2. He's the final boss, so expect a mechanically intensive battle. Phase 1. At the most northern edge of the arena, there are 4 roots of Amirdrassil exposed. The raid's responsibility for Phase 1 is to make sure none of the roots are burned. The arena will continuously fill up with raging flames, and if any of these hit the roots, it will result in a wipe. On LFR, the only ability that creates a raging flame is called Wildfire. This places raging flames on the outermost edge of the arena. With each cast of Wildfire, the raging flames will move closer to the roots. On normal, Fyrakk has one additional ability that also generates raging flames: Firestorm. This will place a ring around a few players. These targeted players need to move towards the very edge of the wildfire flames, as once the debuff expires, they will drop an additional raging flame area. On LFR, players targeted by Firestorm will not drop any additional raging flame. His other main ability during Phase 1 is Dream Rend. Fyrakk will slice open a portal at his location. The entire raid needs to reposition away from this. The Dream Rend will continuously pull players towards it and will instantly kill anyone that gets caught inside. So let's talk about the 2 positioning options here. The raid should always be close to the raging flames, moving only when more flames are created. The tanks should always keep Fyrakk facing away from the raid. The raid can either be positioned in the middle and then relocate to either the left or right side to escape the Dream Rend, or you can position on one of the edges and then move to the opposite to escape the Dream Rend. Do whatever's comfortable and agreed upon with your raid. Now let's cover his other abilities. Burning Presence. This deals damage to all players every 2 seconds and persists the entire battle through all phases. This will also periodically add a debuff called a Flame. This deals additional damage and stacks very quickly. A flame needs to be dispelled. There are 2 tanking abilities: Fireless Bite and Predator. Fireless Bite is a frontal attack that needs to be aimed away from the raid. This applies Fireless Mark, which is a stackable debuff that deals additional damage. Taunt swap around 2 stacks of the mark. Predator is used if a tank taunts but is not within melee range. Fyrakk will leap to that tank, dealing additional damage. At 70% HP, the intermission will begin. Phase 1 abilities. Amirdrassil burns. If any raging flames reach the roots, it results in a wipe. Firestorm. Fyrakk will call meteors down marked by swirlies. On LFR, that's all that happens. On normal, a few players will be marked with rings that once expired will drop raging flames on the ground. Raging Flames. This is a ground area of fire that deals damage to anyone inside. It will burn the roots if placed on top of them. Wildfire. Fyrakk places raging flames on the edge of the arena. With each cast, they get closer and closer to the roots. Dream Rend. Fyrakk slices open a portal. This pulls all players and deals damage while it persists. Any player pulled inside is killed. Burning Presence. This deals raid damage to all players every 2 seconds, occasionally inflicts a flame to some players. A Flame. This is a stackable debuff that deals damage every second. This ramps if not dispelled. Fyrak's Bite. This is the tank ability. It's a frontal attack that deals physical and shadow flame damage and applies the Fyrak's Mark. Fyrak's Mark is the tank debuff. This deals additional shadow flame damage and stacks. You want to swap around 2. Predator. Fyrakk leaps towards his target if that target is outside of melee range. Phase 1 role-specific duties. Tanks. Keep Fyrakk facing away from the raid. Keep him close to the raging flames. Move Fyrakk once he opens a Dream Rend. Taunt swap around 2 stacks of the mark. Healers. Dream Rend will deal heavy, constant raid damage over 8 seconds. Dispel players with the Flame debuff. DPS. Stay behind the boss. On normal, drop Raging Flames close to the already present flames. The Intermission. Once Fyrakk reaches 70% HP, he will jump into the air. After a few seconds, he will crash down on the arena in his dragon form, knocking all players upwards. He will then be shielded and start breathing Shadow Flame onto the Heart of Amirdrassil. The raid has 30 seconds to break this shield or it will wipe the raid. While Fyrakk is breathing against the heart, he will summon multiple Shadow Flame orbs from his left wing around the rear and to his right. These come from the Raging Flames pools that are on the ground. The raid should be split in sections around Fyrakk in order to prevent these orbs from reaching him. Every orb that reaches him will deal heavy damage to the entire raid and apply a stacking dot. Each orb collected will also deal damage to that player. Intermission abilities. Corrupt. Fyrakk begins corrupting the Heart of Amirdrassil and shields himself. After 30 seconds, the heart is corrupted. Shadow Flame Orbs. These spawn from the Raging Flames around the edge and travel towards Fyrakk. These deal damage to players that touch them. If Fyrakk collects any of them, they empower him and also deal raid damage. Shadow Flame Eruption. If Fyrakk absorbs an orb, this will deal heavy raid damage and apply a stackable dot that lasts for 24 seconds. Burning Scales. Fyrakk pulses damage to the entire raid every 2 seconds. The intermission duties. Players should wrap around Fyrakk to help collect the orbs. Players should pop defensive cooldowns if absorbing multiple orbs. Healers, be aware that the raid will take heavy constant damage during this intermission, so make sure you have some cooldowns ready. Once the shield is broken, Fyrakk will jump into the sky and mark a location near the entrance of the platform. After a few seconds, he will come crashing down and kill anyone that is standing inside of the marked zone. The tank should quickly grab him and pull him to the edge of the arena for this phase. There are 2 main goals of Phase 2. The first goal is to get Fyrakk to 30% HP while healing the Heart of Amirdrassil. The heart will constantly be losing health during this phase. In order to heal the heart, the raid will need to keep the spirits that are spawning at the edge of the platform alive as they walk towards the heart. Once a spirit reaches the heart, whatever health they have is then transferred into the heart. If a spirit reaches full life, then they are shielded and all damage is reduced by 99%, meaning that your healers will no longer have to worry about them. The second goal is to maintain control of the adds that Fyrakk spawns with his breath attack. Now let's cover the rest of the phase. Fyrakk will use Greater Firestorm, which is just like Phase 1, except it will spawn 2 Burning Colossus adds. These adds deal damage to anyone close by, and if they reach 100 energy, they will wipe the raid. When Fyrakk summons these adds, he will take off into the sky and then begin charging his breath attack, Shadow Flame Devastation. Once ready, he will fly over the map, breathing down and killing anyone in the path. Wherever he breathes, he will also spawn multiple adds called Screaming Souls. These adds will begin casting Searing Screams, which applies a stackable debuff that deals Shadow Flame damage and increases damage taken by 20%. If any spirits touch these Screaming Souls, they will be corrupted and turn into more Screaming Souls. So these adds need to be grouped up, interrupted, and burned down quickly. Fyrakk's tank abilities remain the same for this phase. Taunt swap every 2 stacks and keep him facing away from the raid. Burning Presence and a Flame debuff also persist through this phase. Phase 2 abilities. The Heart of Amirdrassil. If this reaches 0 HP, it results in a wipe. Spirits of the Kaldorei. These spawn on the edges and need to be healed. They will transfer their HP to the heart if they reach it. Life Force Barrier. If the spirits are healed to full, the spirit will obtain a shield that reduces all damage by 99%. Greater Firestorm. Fyrakk calls down meteors. He will mark 2 players, most likely the tanks, and 2 Burning Colossuses will spawn on their location. Burning Colossuses abilities. Molten Gauntlet. This is a tank buster. It deals heavy physical and Shadow Flame damage. Pulsing Core. This deals damage every 2.5 seconds to any players within 15 yards of the Colossi. Exploding Core at 100 energy explodes, dealing massive damage to the entire raid, and it applies a 20-second dot. Back to Fyrakk. Shadow Flame Devastation. This is his breath attack. He breathes Shadow Flame down across the arena. It kills anyone hit and spawns multiple Screaming Souls. Screaming Souls. They have one ability, which is Searing Screams. This applies a stacking debuff that deals damage every 3 seconds and increases Shadow Flame damage by 20%. Phase 2. Role-specific duties. Tanks. Keep Fyrakk facing away from the raid. Keep the Colossus grouped and near the edge. Pick up as many of the Screaming Souls as possible. Healers. Heal 2 to 3 spirits quickly so they become immune to damage. Expect extra damage to the melee when Colossuses spawn. Expect ramping raid ride damage when Screaming Souls spawn. Keep in mind, you aren't trying to heal the heart completely. As long as the heart has 1 HP when Fyrakk transitions to Phase 3, it's a victory. DPS. Burn down the Colossuses ASAP, interrupt screaming souls as much as possible, knock souls away from the spirits, and kill them ASAP as well. Rotate through defensive cooldowns to help your healers. Phase 3. Once Fyrakk reaches 30% HP, he will take off into the sky and then crash back down onto the arena in his dragon form. The main focus of this phase is to use seeds to avoid Fyrakk's deadly 100 energy attack, Apocalypse Roar. These seeds will spawn on the arena and can be picked up by players. Once picked up, these seeds will bloom right before the boss reaches 100 energy. Players with the seed should decide on a drop order, that way all the seeds aren't dropped at once. Once dropped, it will create a protective barrier for the raid to stand inside of. The raid should have a designated spot marked to place the seeds, that way players know where to group. There are two main differences between LFR and normal. On LFR, these seeds just exist. Players must pick them up and hold them until they are ready to bloom. On normal, players holding the seed must avoid attacks by Fyrakk, otherwise the seed will become a blazing seed. Each blazing seed will deal big raid damage each second over 6 seconds. If a player is targeted by an ability while carrying a seed, they must drop it until whatever attack has targeted them is over. Aside from that, Fyrakk will use Eternal Firestorm, which will call down meteors on the map. Once these land, they will then create some fire tornadoes that move around the arena. Fyrakk will also use a breath attack, which is an insta-kill. The tank buster here is Infernal Maw. This deals big physical damage and then Shadow Flame damage every second. This stacks and does not expire. Taunt swap after every 2 stacks and utilize defensive cooldowns once you pass 6 stacks, or whatever you're comfortable with. Phase 3 abilities. Seed of Amirdrassil. These spawn on the floor and are picked up by players. Bloom. When Fyrakk reaches 100 energy, a seed will bloom. Once a bloomed seed is dropped, it creates a protective barrier that absorbs most of the Apocalypse Roar damage. Blazing Seed. This is normal difficulty only. If a seed is hit by one of Fyrakk's abilities, it will become corrupted and deal raid-wide damage every second over the next 6 seconds. Eternal Firestorm. Fyrakk calls down meteors which are marked by swirlies. Swirling Firestorm. These are tornadoes that spawn from some of the meteors. They move about the arena. They deal damage and knock players backwards. Apocalypse Roar. This is his 100 energy attack, pretty much kills anyone not shielded and also pushes players back. Shadow Flame Breath. Fyrakk charges before letting out a breath of Shadow Flame, insta-kill. Burning Scales, deals raid damage every 2 seconds. Infernal Maw, this is the tank buster. It deals massive physical damage and applies a Shadow Flame dot that ticks damage every second. This stacks and does not expire. Phase 3 role-specific duties. Tanks. Taunt swap after every 2 Infernal Maws. Use defensive cooldowns when the damage starts to ramp. Give or take 6 stacks. Healers. Expect consistent raid-wide damage. Expect a burst of raid damage during Apocalypse Roar. DPS. Only grab a seed if you can avoid mechanics. Drop the seed if targeted by an unavoidable attack. Place the blooming seed in the designated spot and watch your feet. Congratulations, you just cleared Amirdrassil the Dream's Hope raid. If you're interested in a heroic guide, let me know down in the comments. Show some support by pressing that like button. Subscribe if you enjoy WoW content. I have guides, tips and tricks, podcasts, and more. Channel memberships are $1 a month to give you access to extra content and are a great way to show some extra support. Links to that all down below. I'll see you in the next one.